CEO couldn't sleep, finally sleeps soundly after meeting her. Unexpectedly, she is a cleaner. Hello, my incredibly beautiful, precious and loyal family. How are you today? I love you all beyond words. You are my heart, my soul, my everything. Each of you, my beautiful sisters, my brothers, my daughters and my sons, fills my life with meaning. You are the light in my darkest moments, the reason I keep going. A soul-stirring prayer for my family. May love pour over you like an endless river. May peace wash over your spirit, and may joy fill your heart until it overflows. I thank God for each of you, for the love you give, for the strength you share. May every step you take be blessed. May every dream you chase be within your reach, and may you never walk alone. You are a precious treasure, and I will forever be grateful for the gift of you in my life. From the deepest place of my being, thank you for your unwavering love, your relentless support. You have no idea the power your kindness has on me. It keeps me standing strong. Together, we are unstoppable, and with you, we will rise higher than ever before. Never forget how deeply I love you. Please like, comment and share every video, because we are united, unbreakable, and our love will carry us to unimaginable heights. Let's begin this journey together, my beautiful family, with hearts full of love and gratitude. Nathaniel Gray stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, staring at the glittering city below. 52 stories high, he towered above the world he had conquered, a world that now felt hollow despite its magnificence. His reflection revealed impeccable tailoring even at this late hour, but his bloodshot eyes betrayed him, haunted by something money couldn't solve. Sleep, such a simple thing that had become his greatest enemy. "Sir, your sleeping medication." His assistant Marion appeared silently behind him. "It doesn't work," he said without turning. "None of them do." Dr. Harriman called. "He's concerned about—" "I don't need another specialist." His voice was quiet but final. 4 neurologists, 3 sleep therapists, 2 psychiatrists, all with their theories, none with answers. Marion disappeared, leaving him alone with the city and his thoughts. 3 months since he'd slept more than 2 hours consecutively. 3 months of living in a fog that threatened everything he'd built. Nathaniel moved to his bedroom, where the enormous California king bed waited. The mattress alone cost more than most cars, engineered for perfect sleep, a cruel irony. He sat on the edge, running his hands over the Egyptian cotton sheets, preparing for another night of watching shadows creep across his ceiling. His phone buzzed. Elizabeth asking if she could come over. He declined. Her company had become another obligation. By 3:42 a.m., Nathaniel had tried reading financial reports, answered dozens of emails, and attempted meditation. Nothing worked. The silence of his mansion pressed against him from all sides. Sometimes he wondered if this was punishment for the ruthlessness that had built his empire. The lawsuits he'd won, the competitors he'd crushed, the relationships he'd sacrificed, all necessary casualties in his rise to power. At 4:15 a.m., Nathaniel gave up. He changed into jeans and a simple black sweater, clothing that wouldn't mark him as the billionaire CEO of Gray Industries. He chose the least ostentatious of his 12 luxury vehicles, a dark gray Audi, and slipped behind the wheel. The city slept as he drove through empty streets. Even his kingdom needed rest, it seemed. Only he remained awake, a king without peace. He drove aimlessly, hoping exhaustion might finally overcome him. By dawn, he had reached the city limits. The sun rose behind him, casting his shadow long. Across the road ahead, he should turn back. Meetings awaited, decisions needed making. An empire required its emperor. Instead, he pressed the accelerator and watched the city shrink in his rear-view mirror. The countryside opened before him, rolling hills painted with morning light. His phone buzzed incessantly. Marion would be frantic by now. He silenced it and drove on. The day passed in a blur of rural towns and winding roads. For the first time in months, Nathaniel felt something besides exhaustion, a faint stirring of freedom. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The weather report warned of severe thunderstorms. Rational thought suggested turning back, but Nathaniel felt oddly drawn forward. The first raindrops hit his windshield as fatigue began to overtake him. His eyelids grew heavy, a dangerous blessing. He needed to stop, but the GPS showed nothing for miles. The rain intensified, becoming a solid wall of water. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a small wooden sign. Oak Hill Inn, 2 miles. Not a luxury hotel, but shelter from the storm and his exhaustion. Nathaniel followed the narrow turnoff. Trees formed a canopy over the rough road, branches swaying violently in the wind. As the road curved, golden light appeared through the storm's gloom. The inn emerged like a vision, a 2-story stone building with warm light spilling from its windows. A hand-painted sign swung on iron chains. Oak Hill Inn, Est, 1923. Nathaniel parked beside the only other vehicle, an aged blue pickup truck. Rain pounded against him as he dashed toward the covered entrance. The door opened before he could touch it, and warm air rushed out to meet him. The entryway smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. A small fireplace crackled in the main room, casting dancing shadows across wooden floors, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. And there, behind a simple wooden counter, stood a woman looking up from a ledger book. Her curls were pulled back in a loose bun, tendrils framing a face that stopped his rain-soaked world on its axis. Her skin was rich brown, glowing in the amber light, her eyes deep and questioning as they met his. "You picked some night to be traveling," she said, her voice both melody and anchor in the storm-wrapped silence. Nathaniel Gray, the man who commanded boardrooms with a single glance, found himself momentarily speechless. For the first time in years, something unexpected had entered his perfectly controlled world, and somehow, standing there dripping rainwater onto the worn wooden floor of this unknown place, he sensed that everything was about to change. Chapter 2. The Storm's Gift. The storm battered the small inn with unrelenting fury. Rain hammered against the windows, while wind howled through the eaves. Nathaniel stood just inside the doorway, water pooling at his feet, feeling oddly disoriented, like a man who had accidentally stepped through a portal into another world. "You look half drowned," the woman said. "Stay there. I'll get you a towel." She disappeared, leaving Nathaniel to take in his surroundings. The inn's main room was nothing like the sterile luxury he was accustomed to. Here, mismatched armchairs surrounded the stone fireplace. Bookcases overflowed with well-worn volumes, and hand-woven rugs covered portions of the wooden floor. Everything spoke of comfort rather than opulence, of life actually lived rather than merely displayed. The woman returned with a thick towel. "Here, dry off before you catch pneumonia." "Thank you," Nathaniel said, accepting it gratefully. Their fingers brushed momentarily, sending an unexpected current through him. "I'm Nia Bennett," she said, watching as he dried his hair. "I own Oak Hill Inn." "Nathaniel Gray," he replied automatically, then tensed, waiting for the inevitable. Recognition. His name usually triggered immediate reactions, awe, intimidation, or calculated interest. But Nia's expression remained unchanged. "Well, Nathaniel Gray, you picked quite possibly the worst night of the year to be out driving. The weather service says this storm isn't letting up until morning." She gestured to the window where lightning illuminated the torrential rain. "What brings you out here anyway? We're not exactly on the main road." The question caught him off guard. "I couldn't sleep," he said simply. Nya raised an eyebrow. So you decided to go for a drive in a thunderstorm? A smile tugged at his lips. It sounds foolish when you put it that way. Sounds human to me, she replied with a small shrug. We all do strange things when we're tired. Another crash of thunder shook the building, causing the lights to flicker ominously. Looks like you'll be staying the night, Nya said. I have one room left, nothing fancy, but it's clean and comfortable. The rational part of Nathaniel's mind suggested calling his driver or booking into the nearest luxury hotel. Instead, he heard himself say, I'll take it. Nya moved back, behind the counter, and pulled out an actual paper ledger. I'll need your information, we're a bit old-fashioned here. As Nathaniel filled out the simple form, he noticed her hands, elegant but strong, with a small burn scar across one knuckle. Working hands, not decorative ones. She wore no jewelry except a simple silver pendant. The power might go out, she warned, handing him an old-fashioned brass key with room 4 burned into the attached wooden tag. And there are candles in your room and extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. You're alone here? He asked, glancing around the empty inn. Just me tonight. My staff left early to beat the storm. She smiled. Don't worry, I can handle one storm-stranded traveler. As if to challenge her confidence, the lights flickered again and then died completely, plunging the inn into darkness. The only illumination came from the fireplace, casting long shadows across the walls. Perfect timing, Nya sighed. Give me a minute. Nathaniel watched her silhouette move confidently through the darkness. Within moments, she had lit several oil lamps, bathing the room in a golden glow that seemed to belong to another century. There, she said, placing one of the lamps on the counter. Some people find the power going out inconvenient. I find it peaceful. Looking at her in the lamplight, Nathaniel understood. The warm glow softened everything, creating an intimate bubble against the raging storm outside. Are you hungry? Nya asked. I was about to make myself something when you arrived. Nathaniel realized he hadn't eaten since morning. Yes, but don't trouble yourself. She laughed, a rich, melodious sound. It's no trouble. It's what I do. She gestured toward one of the chairs by the fire. Sit, warm up, I'll bring you something. Under normal circumstances, Nathaniel would have insisted on dining alone. But exhaustion had worn away his usual defenses, and something about Nya's straightforward manner made refusal seem impossible. He sank into the chair she'd indicated, the worn leather conforming to his body. The fire's warmth reached toward him, and he found himself staring into the dancing flames, thoughts drifting. The ever-present tension in his shoulders began to ease. Nya returned, carrying a tray with steaming soup, thick slices of bread, and 2 glasses of deep red wine. Homemade. Vegetable soup, she said, setting the tray on a small table between the chairs. Family recipe. Nathaniel couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something not prepared by a professional chef. He tasted the soup cautiously, then with increasing appreciation. It was hearty and flavorful, the kind of food that nourished more than the body. This is excellent, he said, surprising himself with his sincerity. Nya smiled, settling into the chair opposite him. Thank you. My grandmother taught me to cook. She said good food is medicine for whatever ails you. They ate in comfortable silence, the storm providing dramatic background music. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the small table, and Nathaniel would feel that same inexplicable current he'd experienced when their hands touched. So, Nya said eventually, what keeps you from sleeping, Nathaniel Gray? The question was direct, without pretense or polite evasion. In his world, no one asked such personal questions so openly. I don't know, he admitted, the truth slipping out before he could craft a more acceptable answer. It started a few months ago. At first, just occasional nights, but now, he shrugged. Now I can't remember what real sleep feels like. Nair studied him thoughtfully, the lamplight catching golden flecks in her dark eyes. Sometimes the body stays awake because the mind hasn't found peace. Are you a sleep therapist as well as an innkeeper? He asked, his tone lighter than he intended. No, she smiled. Just someone who's had her own sleepless nights. She rose, gathering their empty bowls. Your room is at the top of the stairs, last door on the right. The bathroom is shared, I'm afraid. Second door, on the left. Nathaniel stood, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. Thank you for dinner. And the room. You're welcome. Nya handed him the lamp. Their fingers brushed again, lingering slightly longer than necessary. Sleep well, Nathaniel? He climbed the creaking staircase, lamp casting his shadow large against the wall. Room 4 was small but immaculate, a double bed with a handmaid. Quilt, a wooden dresser, a reading chair by the window. Nothing like his massive bedroom at home, yet somehow more inviting. Nathaniel placed the lamp on the nightstand and moved to the window. Rain streaked the glass, but he could make out his expensive car below, looking strangely out of place in this setting, like him. He prepared for bed with the few toiletries Nia had provided, then slipped between sheets that smelled of sunshine and lavender. The storm continued its assault, but inside this small room he felt oddly protected. As he extinguished the lamp, Nathaniel expected the familiar dread of another sleepless night. Instead, his eyelids grew heavy almost immediately. His last conscious thought was of Naya's smile in the firelight, and then, miraculously, he drifted into the deepest sleep he had known in months. Outside, the storm raged on, but it had already delivered its unexpected gift. Chapter 3. First Encounter. Nathaniel awoke to silence, not the artificial quiet of his soundproofed penthouse, but the profound stillness that follows a violent storm, a world washed clean. Sunlight streamed through the window, falling across his face in warm bands that coaxed him from the deepest sleep he could remember. For a moment, disorientation gripped him, the unfamiliar ceiling above, the modest furnishings around him. None of it registered until memory returned in a rush. The storm, the inn, Naya. He glanced at his watch and sat up in shock. 9:47. He had slept for nearly 11 hours straight, an impossibility for months. His body felt different, almost lighter, as if a weight had been temporarily lifted from his shoulders. The floor creaked beneath his feet as he moved to the window. Outside, the aftermath of the storm was evident in scattered branches and puddles that reflected the clear blue sky. His car sat where he'd left it, speckled with fallen leaves. Beyond the small parking area stretched rolling countryside, verdant and glistening with raindrops that caught the morning sun like scattered diamonds. Nathaniel showered quickly in the small bathroom, using the generic soap and shampoo provided. No Italian marble or rainfall showerheads here, just clean, functional simplicity. He dressed in yesterday's clothes, now dry though slightly wrinkled, and headed downstairs, drawn by the aroma of coffee and something sweet baking. The inn looked different in daylight, smaller perhaps, but filled with details he hadn't noticed the night before. Framed photographs lined the walls, landscapes of the surrounding countryside, alongside portraits of people with Nia's eyes and smile. Bookshelves revealed eclectic tastes, dog-eared classics beside modern novels, travel guides, and books on everything from astronomy to beekeeping. He found Naya in the small dining room, setting places at a table by windows that overlooked a garden still dripping from the night's deluge. She wore a simple sundress, her hair loose today, falling in natural curls past her shoulders. Sunlight caught her profile as she worked, and Nathaniel paused in the doorway, struck by her unconscious grace. "Good morning," he said, his voice unusually rough from sleep. She turned, surprise registering briefly before her face broke into a warm smile. "The sleepless man awakens. I was beginning to think you'd hibernate through lunch." "I haven't slept like that in—" He trailed off, calculating. "Months, maybe years." "Must be the country air," she replied, gesturing to a chair. Poured from a ceramic pot, the rich aroma filling the space between them. "Cream, sugar?" "Black is fine." Nya nodded approvingly. "A man after my own heart. Can't improve on good coffee." She disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a plate of scones, still warm from the oven. "Blueberry," she explained, setting them down. "From bushes just behind the inn." Nathaniel bit into one, closing his eyes involuntarily. At the burst of flavor, tangy berries in buttery pastry, nothing like the precise artistic creations his chef prepared. "Good?" Nia asked, watching his expression with slight amusement. "Incredible," he admitted. "Did your grandmother teach you to bake as well?" "Among other things." She sat across from him, cradling her own coffee mug between her hands. "How's the world? Look after a good night's sleep?" "Different," he said truthfully. "Clearer." Their eyes met over steaming cups, and Nathaniel felt an unfamiliar sensation, a kind of recognition, as if some part of him had been waiting to find those eyes without knowing it. "The road should be clear now," Nia said, breaking the moment. "Though the Mulligan Creek Bridge might still be underwater, you'd need to take the long way around if you're heading north." Reality intruded abruptly. The world he'd temporarily escaped still waited. Urgent emails, missed meetings, Marion's increasingly panicked messages. He should leave immediately, damage control already calculated in his mind. "I should go," he said, though the words felt hollow. "Of course." Was that disappointment flickering across her features, or merely polite acknowledgement? "Let me get your bill ready." While she went to prepare his invoice, Nathaniel checked his phone. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, 98 emails. The weight he'd shed in sleep settled back onto his shoulders, heavier than before. At the front desk, Naya handed him a handwritten receipt. The amount was so modest compared to his usual expenditures that he almost laughed. Instead, he handed her his platinum card. "We don't take cards," she said. "Cash or check only?" "I don't carry much cash," he admitted, reaching for his wallet and finding only $100 bill. "That's more than enough," Naya said, reaching for change. "Keep it," Nathaniel said quickly, "for the inconvenience of taking me in during the storm." She hesitated, then nodded once, placing the money in an old wooden cash box. "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Nathaniel found himself reluctant to leave, though logic insisted he must. What reason could he possibly have to stay? Yet something in this place, in this woman, had granted him the sleep he'd been desperately seeking for months. "I have meetings in the city," he said finally, the excuse sounding feeble even to his own ears. "Important ones, I'm sure." Her tone held no judgment, only simple acceptance. "Yes." He extended his hand formally. "Thank you for your hospitality, Nia Bennett." She took his hand, her grip firm and warm. "You're welcome, Nathaniel Gray. Drive safely." Their hands remained, connected a moment longer than necessary, that same inexplicable current flowing between them. Then she released him, and Nathaniel felt the loss of contact like a physical thing. He walked to his car, keys heavy in his hand. The inn looked even more picturesque in daylight, weathered stone glowing in the morning sun, window boxes filled with vibrant flowers, a haven hidden from the world, his world, by more than just distance. As he slid behind the wheel, he caught sight of Naya watching from the doorway, one hand raised in a simple farewell. Nathaniel started the engine, the luxury vehicle purring to life beneath him. He should drive away without looking back. Return to his life, his responsibilities, his sleepless existence. Instead, he lowered his window. "Is it always this quiet here?" Nya smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "Except during leaf season when the tourists descend? Why?" "I might need to escape the city again sometime." It wasn't a question, not quite, but the implication hung in the air between them. "We're always here," she replied, "though I can't promise another storm." Nathaniel nodded, allowing himself one last look at her, memorizing the way sunlight played across her features, the perfect curve of her smile, the depth in her eyes that seemed to see more than most. Then he drove away, watching the inn recede in his rearview mirror until it disappeared around a bend in the road. The farther he drove, the more unreal the previous night seemed. A strange interlude, a temporary respite from reality. Yet as he merged onto the highway leading back to the city, Nathaniel realized something had changed. For the first time in months, he felt truly awake. The world around him appeared in sharper focus, colors more vivid, sensations more acute. One night of profound sleep had altered his perception, but he suspected it wasn't just the sleep. It was her, Nya, a woman who had looked at him and seen just a man. Not a billionaire, not a CEO, not a prize to be won or an advantage to be leveraged. Just Nathaniel Gray, stripped of all his armor. By the time his car reached the city limits, he had made a decision that would change everything. He would return to Oak Hill Inn. Not immediately. That would seem desperate. But soon. Very soon. Chapter 4. Gravitational Pull, 3 weeks. Nathaniel had lasted exactly 3 weeks before the gravitational pull of Oak Hill Inn became irresistible. 21 days of meetings, conference calls, and business dinners. 21 nights of diminishing sleep, his brief respite making the return to insomnia all the more cruel. He told himself his return was logical. The inn had provided what countless specialists and medications could not: rest. It was simple cause and effect, nothing more. If a certain innkeeper with perceptive eyes and a disarming smile featured prominently in his thoughts, well, that was merely an interesting detail, not the driving force behind his decision. This time, Nathaniel drove out on a clear Friday afternoon, sunlight gilding the countryside as summer firmly established its reign. No storms provided convenient excuses. He would need another reason for his appearance. He'd rehearsed several plausible explanations during the drive, each sounding more contrived than the last. Oak Hill Inn appeared around the final bend, bathed in golden afternoon light. Flower beds now exploded with color. The ancient oak that gave the inn its name spread massive branches over half the building, dappling the stone walls with shifting shadows. Nathaniel parked beside a different vehicle than before, a compact sedan rather than the blue pickup. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he approached the entrance, heart inexplicably accelerating with each step. The door opened before he could reach for it, but instead of Nya, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes greeted him. "Welcome to Oak Hill," she said, checking in. Disappointment crashed through him with surprising force. "Is Nya Bennett available?" The woman's expression softened with understanding. "She's in the garden, around back. Just follow the stone path." She stepped aside, gesturing toward an interior hallway. "Through there and out the back door." "Thank you," Nathaniel said, momentarily thrown off script. He followed her directions, passing through a small sunroom filled with potted plants before stepping outside. The garden stretched behind the inn in orderly sections, vegetables, herbs, and flowers, all arranged in patterns that were both practical and beautiful. And there, kneeling beside a row of tomato plants, was Nya. She wore denim overalls over A white t-shirt, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face, gardening gloves covered in soil. She was singing softly to herself, something melodic and soothing that Nathaniel didn't recognize. For a moment, he simply watched her, struck by how perfectly she fit into this setting, this life so different from his own. She belonged here among growing things, sunshine and simplicity. He felt suddenly like an intruder, bringing complications she hadn't asked for. He was about to retreat when she looked up, freezing mid-motion as she registered his presence. "Nathaniel Gray," she said, rising slowly and pulling off her gloves. "You came back." "I did," he replied, all his prepared explanations deserting him. "Another sleepless night." She tilted her head, studying him with those perceptive eyes. 21 of them, actually. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You've been counting." "Since I left here," he admitted. Nya brushed soil from her overalls, an unconscious gesture that somehow embodied everything genuine about her. "And you thought another night here might help?" "I hoped it might." He met her gaze directly. "If you have a room available." "We're booked solid this weekend," she said, and his disappointment must have shown because she quickly added, "But Mrs. Porter always keeps a cancellation list. Let me check." She led him back inside, moving through the inn with easy familiarity. The elderly woman, Mrs. Porter presumably, looked up from the reception desk as they approached. "Marge, this is Mr. Gray," Nya said. "He stayed with us during that big storm last month. Any cancellations for tonight?" Mrs. Porter consulted. A leather-bound ledger. "The Hendersons called this morning. Their daughter's soccer tournament was cancelled." She looked up at Nathaniel with a conspiratorial smile. "Room 4 is available, if that suits you." "That would be perfect," he said, unreasonably pleased to have the same room. While Mrs. Porter handled the paperwork, Nya excused herself. "I need to finish in the garden before dinner. Make yourself comfortable." Nathaniel completed the check-in process, then found himself with several hours before dinner. Unable to face the prospect of sitting alone in his room, he returned to the garden on impulse. Nya looked up from her work, surprise evident. "Did you forget something?" "I thought." "I might help," he said, the offer surprising even himself. She laughed, the sound as refreshing as he remembered. "You! In that outfit?" She nodded toward his tailored trousers and pristine button-down shirt. "I'm capable of more than you might think," he replied, rolling up his sleeves in demonstration. Nya studied him thoughtfully, then pointed to a nearby shed. "There's an apron hanging inside the door, and extra gloves on the shelf." Minutes later, Nathaniel Gray, whose hands typically touched nothing more strenuous than a computer keyboard or crystal tumbler, was kneeling in soil, following Nya's instructions on weeding between rows of lettuce. "The trick is knowing what to remove and what to keep," she explained, demonstrating the difference between vegetable seedlings and invasive interlopers. "Some weeds are obvious, but others mimic what you want to grow. You have to look closely." Nathaniel worked beside her, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple physical task. Sunshine warmed his back, birdsong filled the air, and occasionally their hands would brush as they worked down the same row, sending that now familiar current through him. "Why did you really come back?" Nya asked quietly, not looking up from her work. The question hung between them, deserving honesty. "I slept here," he said finally. "Really slept. For the first time in months. I thought it might have been coincidence. The storm, the exhaustion. But when I returned to the city, the insomnia returned too." "So you're here for the bed." Her tone was light, but something in her eyes suggested the answer mattered. "Not just the bed," Nathaniel admitted. "There was something about this place. He hesitated, then finished simply, "You." Nya's hands stilled in the soil. "You don't know me, Nathaniel." I know you saw me differently than most people do. And how is that? Just as a man, he said, not as... Not as what? Nathaniel hesitated. In their previous encounter, she had shown no sign of recognizing his name or status. It had been refreshing, liberating even. If he explained now, would it change how she saw him? Not as someone important, he said finally, compromising with the truth. Nia laughed softly. Hate to break it to you, but around here everyone's important. Mrs. Porter was a pediatric surgeon before retiring. Old Mr. Jameson, who delivers our milk, won the Pulitzer for photography in the 70s. My cook trained in Paris before deciding she preferred country life. She lifted a hand, gesturing toward the peaceful landscape surrounding them. People come here for all kinds of reasons. Some are running from something, others running toward something. I don't need their life stories to welcome them. The simplicity of her philosophy struck Nathaniel deeply. In his world, everyone was categorized, evaluated, their utility and threat level assessed before any real interaction began. Nia offered a clean slate to everyone who crossed her threshold. They continued working until the garden was bathed in golden light. Nathaniel's back ached pleasantly, his hands were filthy despite the gloves, and his expensive shirt had developed a tear at the elbow, yet he felt more content than he had in years. You're a natural, Nia said, surveying their work, for a city boy. High praise, he replied, enjoying the easy banter that had developed between them. She smiled, then gestured toward the inn. Dinner's at 7. There's a hiking trail behind the property if you want to explore before then. About a mile out, there's a spot overlooking the valley that's worth seeing. Taking her suggestion, Nathaniel followed the trail into the woods behind the inn. Ancient trees stretched overhead, creating a cathedral of leaves that filtered sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The path climbed steadily, requiring just enough exertion to feel purposeful. After 20 minutes, the woods opened unexpectedly to reveal a rocky outcropping overlooking the valley below. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills in a patchwork of greens and golds, a silver ribbon of river winding through distant fields, and the tiny speck of Oak Hill Inn, nestled among protective trees. Nathaniel sat on a sun-warmed rock, experiencing a moment of perfect clarity. His life in the city, the empire he'd built, the power he wielded, the luxury he'd accumulated, suddenly seemed very far away, not unimportant exactly, but perhaps not as all-consuming as he'd allowed it to become. By the time he returned to the inn, evening was approaching. He showered and changed into fresh clothes, then made his way downstairs. Unlike his previous visit, the dining room now held several other guests engaged in quiet conversation. Nia moved among them, filling water glasses and exchanging pleasantries. She had changed as well, her overalls replaced by a simple blue dress that somehow made her more luminous. When she saw him, she nodded toward a small table by the window, slightly separated from the others. I saved you a quiet spot, she said, leading him to it. Figured you might prefer some privacy. The gesture touched him unexpectedly. Thank you. Throughout dinner, a meal of locally sourced ingredients prepared with surprising sophistication, Nathaniel found his eyes continually drawn to Nia as she managed the dining room with effortless grace. She treated each guest with the same genuine warmth, yet occasionally her gaze would find his across the room, a private connection amid the general conviviality. Later, when the other guests had retired and Mrs. Porter had gone home, Nathaniel, who found Nia on the back porch, nursing a glass of wine as she gazed at stars emerging in the darkening sky. "May I join you?" he asked, pausing at the screen door. She nodded toward the empty chair beside her. How was dinner? Exceptional, he said truthfully. Your cook deserves her Parisian training. I'll tell her you said so. Naya offered him the bottle. Wine? He poured himself a glass, then settled beside her, content to share the peaceful silence. Crickets chirped in the surrounding darkness, and somewhere in the distance an owl called softly. "Did you make it to the Overlook?" she asked eventually. "I did. It's beautiful." "My father proposed to my mother there," Naya said, her voice softer with memory. "He always said he could see their entire future spread out before them from that spot." "Is this in their legacy?" Nathaniel asked. "My grandparents started it. My parents expanded it. Now it's mine." She sipped her wine thoughtfully. "What about you, Nathaniel? What legacy are you building in the city that keeps you awake at night?" The question was innocent enough, but it pierced something essential. What legacy was he building? Taller buildings, greater market share, more zeros in his bank account, or just a larger void where something meaningful should be? "I'm not sure anymore," he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. Nya turned to face him, her expression gentle in the dim porch light. "Maybe that's why you can't sleep." Their eyes held across the small space between their chairs, and Nathaniel felt something shift between them. A recognition, an acknowledgement of whatever invisible thread had drawn him back to this place, to her. "Maybe," he agreed softly. They talked late into the night, conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. Nya spoke of her childhood at the inn, of college studies abandoned when her father fell ill, of dreams both fulfilled and deferred. Nathaniel shared selective details of his own life, his rise through the business world, the companies he'd transformed, carefully omitting the scale of his success and the fame that accompanied it. When the wine was gone and the night had deepened around them, Naya stood reluctantly. "I should let you get some sleep. Isn't that why you came back?" Nathaniel rose as well, suddenly aware of how close they stood in the intimate darkness of the porch. "One of the reasons," he said, voice dropping to match the hushed quality of the night. For a moment they remained motionless, suspended in possibility. Then Naya stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Nathaniel Gray. Sleep well." "Good night, Nya Bennett." He watched her disappear inside, then turned to gaze at the star-filled sky above. His world in the city knew nothing of stars. Light pollution erased them completely. Here they spread across the darkness in magnificent profusion, ancient and eternal. That night, in room 4, with its handmade quilt and simple furnishings, Nathaniel slept deeply once again. But his dreams were filled with garden soil, starlight, and a woman whose smile had somehow become necessary to his peace. Chapter 5. Awakening. Summer unfurled across the countryside in waves of green and gold. Nathaniel found himself drawn back to Oak Hill Inn with increasing frequency, first monthly, then bi-weekly, finally settling into a rhythm of weekly visits that became the fixed point around which the rest of his life revolved. He established patterns. Arrive Friday afternoon. Help Nya with whatever project occupied her. Garden work, minor repairs, inventory, hike to the Overlook, dinner among other guests, though increasingly Nya would join him at his table after serving was complete. Evening conversations on the porch that stretched toward midnight. Deep, restorative sleep. Saturday morning breakfast together before his reluctant departure. Each time he left, the distance back to the city seemed longer, the contrast between his two worlds more stark. In one, he commanded empires, moved markets, lived in calculated luxury that felt increasingly hollow. In the other, he simply existed, his hands in soil, sweat on his brow, laughter coming easily for the first time in years. To maintain this sanctuary, Nathaniel carefully guarded the separate spheres of his life. At Oak Hill, he revealed nothing of his wealth or position, allowing Naya to believe he was merely a moderately successful businessman. In the city, He told no one about the inn or the woman who ran it, not even Marion, who had begun to comment on his improved temperament and the mysterious weekend disappearances. "You've scheduled another personal day for Friday," she noted, one Wednesday in late July, studying her tablet with undisguised curiosity. "That's the 6th consecutive week." "Is there a problem with my calendar?" Nathaniel asked, not looking up from the contracts he was reviewing. "No, sir. It's just unusual." He glanced up then, meeting her speculative gaze with a finality that ended further questions. "The company won't collapse if I'm unavailable for 24 hours, Marion." On this particular Friday, Nathaniel arrived at Oak Hill earlier than usual, having rescheduled a board meeting to escape the city before afternoon traffic. The parking area held several unfamiliar vehicles, a promising sign that business was good. He entered to find Mrs. Porter checking in a couple who looked like typical urban escapees, their designer outdoor wear still pristine and unworn. She spotted him over their shoulders and smiled knowingly. "She's in the kitchen, Mr. Gray." Nathaniel nodded his thanks, bypassing the formal check-in process that had become unnecessary weeks ago. Room 4 was always reserved for him now, an unspoken arrangement neither he nor Naya directly acknowledged. He found her in the spacious country kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she kneaded bread dough with rhythmic expertise. Flour dusted her forearms, and a streak of it adorned one cheek where she'd brushed hair from her face. She looked up at his entrance, her smile igniting something warm and essential in his chest. "You're early," she said, pleasure evident in her voice. Meeting ended, sooner than expected. He moved to the sink, washing his hands without being asked, before joining her at the wooden work table. "Need help?" "You know how to make sourdough?" "I know how to follow instructions," he countered, taking his place beside her. Nia laughed, then demonstrated the proper kneading technique. "Like this, firm but gentle. You want to develop the gluten without overworking it." Nathaniel mimicked her movements, enjoying the tactile sensation of the dough beneath his hands. Working beside her had become one of his greatest pleasures, the casual brushing of shoulders, the easy rhythm they found together, the simple satisfaction of creating something tangible. "You're getting good at this," Nia observed, watching his technique with approval. "Keep it up and I might have to hire you." "What's the pay?" he asked, entering their familiar pattern of banter. "Room and board, plus all the sourdough you can eat." "Tempting," he said, meaning it more than she could know. They worked companionably, preparing several loaves for the next morning's breakfast. When the dough was resting in lined baskets, they moved to the garden for the evening harvest. Tomatoes heavy on the vine, fragrant basil, zucchini that seemed to double in size overnight. "We should check the beehives before dinner," Nia said as they filled harvest baskets. "Andy Thatcher stopped by yesterday and thought the second hive might be ready for harvesting." The beehives were a recent addition to Oak Hill's grounds, part of Nia's commitment to sustainable practices. Nathaniel had helped install them earlier, in the summer, discovering an unexpected fascination with the complex insect society. They donned protective gear, veiled hats and long gloves before approaching the white wooden boxes nestled at the edge of a wildflower meadow. Naya moved with confident gentleness among the bees, showing Nathaniel how to use the smoker to calm them before lifting frames heavy with honeycomb. "Look at this," she said, holding up a frame where golden honey gleamed in perfect hexagonal cells. "This is what cooperation creates, thousands of individuals working together towards something beautiful and sustaining." Nathaniel watched her face as she spoke, struck by the passion in her expression. In these moments, Naya revealed the depth of her connection to this place, this life she'd created. It wasn't just work for her, it was purpose, philosophy, love made manifest. The realization struck him suddenly, there among the humming bees and golden light. He loved her. Not just her beauty or her calm presence or the sleep he found in her domain. He loved her mind, her values, her capable hands and perceptive eyes. He loved the person she was and the way he felt when with her, more authentic, more grounded, more alive. The knowledge nearly buckled his knees, forcing him to grip the edge of the hive for support. "Nathaniel, are you okay?" Naya's concerned voice penetrated his revelation. "Fine," he managed, just light-headed for a moment. She studied him closely. "You've been working in the sun too long. Let's finish up here." They completed the honey harvest in silence, Nathaniel's mind racing with implications. He had not planned this, had not even recognized the steady progression of his feelings until this thunderbolt moment of clarity. What would he do with this? Knowledge? What could he do? Their worlds remained fundamentally separate. If she knew who he really was, the extent of his wealth, the power he wielded, the public scrutiny that came with his position, would she still look at him with that unguarded warmth? Or would her eyes change, as everyone's eventually did? By dinner time, Nathaniel had composed himself enough to maintain their normal routine, though every glance, every casual touch, every shared smile now resonated differently. Naya seemed unusually quiet as well, occasionally catching his eye with a thoughtful expression before looking away. After the other guests had retired and Mrs. Porter had gone home, they took their customary places on the porch, glasses of wine in hand. Summer insects provided a symphony around them, the air heavy with heat and unspoken thoughts. "Why do you keep coming back here, Nathaniel?" Naya asked suddenly, her question piercing the comfortable silence. He turned to look at her, silhouetted against the porch light. "You know why." "Do I?" She set her wineglass down, turning to face him fully. "At first I thought it was just the sleep. Then I thought maybe you needed a break from your life in the city. But it's been months now, and there's something—" She paused, searching for words. "Something you're not saying." The moment had arrived sooner than he'd expected, pushing him toward a precipice he wasn't prepared to navigate. Tell her everything or continue the partial truth. Risk losing what they had built or risk building it on a foundation that wasn't entirely solid. "There are aspects of my life I haven't shared," he admitted carefully. "I know," she said simply. "I've known for weeks." Surprise jolted through him. "What do you mean?" Naya reached for her phone, tapped the screen a few times, then handed it to him. There on the display was a business magazine cover featuring his face, alongside the headline, "Nathaniel Gray, the billionaire who transformed American industry." "Mrs. Porter's granddaughter is in business school," Naya explained quietly. "She recognized you from a case study they did on your company. She showed me that article about a month ago." Nathaniel felt the careful separation of his worlds collapse. "Naya, why didn't you tell me?" The question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. "Because when I arrived that first night, you treated me like anyone else," he said, the truth flowing now that concealment was impossible. "Do you have any idea how rare that is in my life? How valuable? I was afraid if you knew, you thought I'd treat you differently. Wouldn't you have?" Nya considered this, her face thoughtful in the dim light. "I might have been more intimidated at first," she acknowledged. "But the man I've come to know over these months isn't defined by his bank account or business empire." She reclaimed her phone, setting it aside deliberately. "That man needs bread dough with the same care he gives to harvesting honey. He notices when the cardinals return to the oak tree. He listens, really listens, when people speak." Her assessment of him, so different from the cutthroat reputation he'd cultivated in business, touched something deep within Nathaniel. "Why didn't you say something when you found out?" he asked. "I was waiting for you to tell me," she said simply. I figured you had your reasons." The understanding in her voice, the grace she offered, overwhelmed him. Without conscious decision, Nathaniel moved from his chair to kneel before hers, taking her hands in his. "Nya," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "These months, being with you, have changed everything for me. I keep coming back because when I'm here, I feel like myself. Not the self I constructed to succeed or to impress or to win, just myself." Her eyes glistened in the low light, her fingers tightening around his. "And who is that self, Nathaniel?" "A man who is falling in love with you," he answered, the truth simple and profound. Time suspended between them, the night holding its breath. Then Naya leaned forward slowly, deliberately, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss began gently. A question, an exploration, a first crossing of a threshold long anticipated. Then something ignited between them, months of growing connection, crystallizing into physical expression. Nathaniel's hands moved to frame her face, her skin warm silk beneath his touch. Naya's fingers threaded through his hair, drawing him closer, as the kiss deepened into something hungry and revelatory. When they finally separated, both breathing unevenly, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers, unwilling to move further away. "I've wanted to do that since the storm," Naya whispered, her breath warm against his lips. "Why didn't you?" "I was afraid you'd stop coming back." Nathaniel drew back slightly to see her face, tracing her cheekbone with his thumb. "Nothing could keep me away now." They remained on the porch until the moon rose high overhead, talking, kissing, reimagining the boundaries of their relationship. When they finally went inside, Nathaniel walked her to her private quarters at the back of the inn, their parting kiss at her door, a promise of all that awaited them. That night, in room 4, Nathaniel lay awake, not from insomnia, but from joy. So acute it bordered on pain. Everything had changed, yet everything had simply become what it was always meant to be. Outside his window, the summer night pulsed with life, crickets singing, occasional fireflies punctuating the darkness with ephemeral light, the ancient oak's leaves whispering secrets to the stars. Nathaniel listened, more awake and more at peace than he had ever been. Dawn found him at the overlook, watching sunrise gild the valley in transcendent light. Like Naya's father before him, he could see a future spread below, different from the one he had meticulously planned, but infinitely more precious for its unexpectedness. It was, he realized, the first morning of his awakening. Chapter 6. Two worlds collide. Autumn transformed Oak Hill into a masterpiece of crimson and gold. The morning light setting ablaze every leaf and branch. The ancient oak that gave the inn its name crowned the property with a magnificent copper dome visible for miles. Nathaniel's visits continued through these glorious days, though their nature had evolved. No longer hiding his identity, he worked to bridge his two worlds, bringing work with him sometimes and taking conference calls from the inn's back porch, his deep voice a counterpoint to the rustling leaves. Nia had visited his city twice, navigating his urban environment with quiet confidence. In the symphony hall, he'd been distracted by her profile in the dimmed light, the elegant line of her neck more captivating than the music. At his penthouse, she'd stood before the wall of windows, her silhouette against the cityscape stealing his breath. "It's magnificent," she'd said, turning to him with those perceptive eyes. "But I don't know how you sleep with all that light. Pollution. I can't even see the stars." Her observation struck him profoundly. Even in his most intimate space, she remained authentically herself, evaluating his world by her own internal compass rather than being dazzled by its opulence. Their relationship deepened with each passing week. Physical passion balanced by intellectual connection, shared silences as meaningful as conversations. When their hands touched across the dinner table or their bodies brushed while working in the garden, electricity sparked between them. They discovered complementary strengths. His strategic thinking enhanced her practical problem-solving. Her intuitive understanding of people tempered his analytical approach. The inevitable collision came on a brilliant October morning. They were in the garden harvesting the last of the season's bounty before the first frost, a comfortable domesticity. Between them, Nathaniel worked the row of root vegetables, while Naya collected fallen apples from the small orchard beyond. The sun warmed his shoulders as he watched her reach up to pluck a stubborn apple, her movement graceful and unself-conscious. "We should replace the east fence before winter," Nya remarked, returning to set her basket of apples beside the garden gate. "I noticed that last week," he agreed, brushing soil from a particularly impressive carrot. "We could do it next weekend if the weather holds." Nya smiled at his casual "we," a testament to how thoroughly he had integrated himself into Oak Hill's maintenance. She knelt beside him in the dark earth, her shoulder brushing his in a way that sent warmth through him. Their peaceful morning shattered with the distinctive sound of tires on gravel. A sleek black SUV pulled into the parking area, its polished surface incongruous among the autumn leaves and rural simplicity. Three figures emerged in business attire: Lawrence Hadley, chairman of Gray Industries Board, Marion, his executive assistant, and Isaiah Reynolds, head of corporate communications. "Nathaniel," Lawrence called, his voice carrying across the garden with imperious certainty, "we need to speak with you. Urgently." Nya glanced between Nathaniel and the newcomers, sensing the tension immediately. "Friends of yours?" "Colleagues," he corrected, rising from the garden row. "Wait here." He squeezed her hand briefly, drawing strength from her steady presence. He crossed the garden, acutely aware of the soil staining his clothes. "What's happened?" he asked without preamble. "Where's your phone?" Lawrence countered, disapproval evident in his tight expression. "We've been trying to reach you for hours." Isaiah handed Nathaniel his tablet with obvious reluctance. The screen displayed a tabloid headline in garish yellow: "Billionaire Playboy's Secret Country Love Nest." Below it, several photographs showed intimate moments between Nathaniel and Naya, her head thrown back in laughter as they walked the grounds, his hand at the small of her back on the porch, their silhouettes embracing by the garden gate at sunset. "This broke an hour ago," Isaiah explained, his calm voice belying the anxiety in his eyes. "Social media is exploding with it. The stock has already dropped 3 points. "The timing couldn't be worse," Lawrence added, his gaze flickering contemptuously over Nathaniel's soil-stained clothing. "Archer's board is notoriously conservative. If they think our CEO is distracted by personal entanglements, they could pull out entirely." Nathaniel felt Naya's presence beside him before he saw her, her warmth a counterpoint to the chill emanating from his colleagues. "I see we have a situation," she said quietly, her shoulder brushing against his arm in subtle solidarity. The group relocated to the private dining room. Mrs. Porter brought coffee, her concerned gaze lingering on Naya before she closed the doors. Nathaniel sat beside Naya, their soil-stained hands linked on the polished table surface, a visual declaration that impressed neither Lawrence nor Isaiah. "We need to contain this immediately," Isaiah said, outlining his crisis management strategy. "We'll position her as a longtime family friend, nothing romantic, who provides occasional retreat space for your documented insomnia issues." Nathaniel's grip tightened on Naya's hand. "No," he said with quiet finality. "Nathaniel," Lawrence began, his tone dripping condescension, "I understand you're upset about the privacy invasion, but—" "No," Nathaniel repeated more forcefully. "I won't lie about my relationship with Naya to placate Archer's board or boost our stock price." When his colleagues reluctantly stepped out at Naya's suggestion, she turned to face him fully. Her eyes, deep and thoughtful, searched his face. "Tell me what's really at stake here," she said, her fingers tracing gentle patterns on his palm. Nathaniel sighed, the touch anchoring him. "The Archer acquisition is the biggest in Grey Industries' history. If it falls through because of this, thousands of jobs would be affected," Nia finished, understanding immediately. She touched his face, thumb brushing across his cheekbone. "I love that you want to protect what we have, but I also understand the responsibility you carry." "What are you saying?" he asked, studying her face intently. "I'm saying that perhaps Isaiah's strategy isn't entirely wrong," she replied carefully. "Not the part about denying our relationship. I won't accept that either. But maybe we need to be strategic about how we present it to the world." When they recalled the others, Nathaniel stood with his arm around Nia's waist. Together, they outlined a strategy that acknowledged their relationship while emphasizing its positive impact on both their worlds. That evening, after his colleagues departed, they stood in the gathering twilight, watching taillights disappear down the driveway. Stars emerged above them as Nathaniel pulled Nia close, her back against his chest, his arms encircling her waist. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair, breathing in her scent of lavender and apple, "for all of this." She turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his, moonlight silvering her features. This was inevitable. Our worlds were always going to collide eventually. "Does it change things for you?" he asked, voicing the fear that had haunted him throughout the day. "Seeing that side of my life?" Nya considered the question seriously. "It makes some things clearer. The pressure you live under, the responsibilities you carry." She rose on tiptoe, her lips brushing his briefly. "But that man in the garden this morning, concerned about rotting fence posts, he's the same man who just navigated a corporate crisis, two sides of the same person." Relief washed through him as he drew her closer, his lips finding hers with renewed certainty. Her body melded against his, warm and yielding yet strong. That night, for the first time, Nathaniel didn't return to room 4. Instead, he followed Nia to her private quarters, crossing a threshold both physical and symbolic. In the sanctuary of her bedroom, moonlight filtering through gauzy curtains, they explored each other with reverent hands and eager lips. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, the words both declaration and prayer as their bodies joined, in perfect rhythm. "And I love all of you," she answered, her eyes holding his as they moved together, "the businessman and the gardener, all of you." Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the handmade quilt, Nathaniel traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "We're going to have to get used to this," Nia murmured, her head pillowed on his chest. "The public interest, the scrutiny." "Or we could just disappear," he suggested. "Buy an island somewhere." Nya laughed softly. "You'd be bored within a month, and I'd miss my inn." She looked up at him. "This is our reality now. Two worlds that have to find a way to coexist. And if they can't?" The question emerged from his deepest fear. "Then we create a third," she said simply. "Something entirely our own." Outside, autumn winds rustled through the ancient oak's remaining leaves, nature's reminder that change was inevitable, necessary, and sometimes beautiful. In its transformation, their worlds had collided, yes, but from that collision, something stronger was already emerging. Chapter 7. Retreat. November descended on Oak Hill with bitter winds and flurries of snow that dusted the landscape like powdered sugar. The tourists had vanished with the fall foliage, leaving the inn eerily quiet during weekdays. For Nia, this lull should have brought welcome respite after autumn's frenzied pace. Instead, it left too much time for reading the endless stream of articles about her relationship with Nathaniel. The initial media storm had intensified over 3 weeks, despite Isaiah's careful management. "Country girl snares billionaire bachelor," screamed one tabloid headline. "Gray's rural romance, calculated career move," suggested another, alongside unflattering photographs taken with telephoto lenses. Photographers lurked at Oak Hill's entrance, forcing Naya to post private property signs. On one particularly intrusive day, she'd confronted a man hiding in the woods near the beehives. His camera lens had looked almost weapon-like, pointing at her from the undergrowth. Even worse were the journalists who booked rooms under false pretenses. Mrs. Porter had become their first line of defense, her grandmotherly appearance concealing a razor-sharp instinct for deception. "Turned away another one this morning," she reported, as they prepared the dining room for the few midweek guests. "Claimed to be a bird watcher, in November, with no binoculars but a very expensive camera." She straightened a napkin with unnecessary precision. "I told him we were fully booked, then watched him drive straight to the Overlook Trail access." Nya sighed, her fingers trembling slightly as she arranged silverware. "I'm sorry you have to deal with this, Marge." "Nonsense," Mrs. Porter replied, gently covering Naya's hand with her own weathered one. "This inn is as much my home as yours. It's you I'm worried about. You look exhausted." The observation was accurate. Sleep had become elusive, her nights haunted by the day's headlines and tomorrow's potential invasions. Even her passion with Nathaniel during his weekend visits had become tinged with performance anxiety, an awareness of potential watchers that she couldn't quite shake despite his tender reassurances. By Wednesday afternoon, heavy snow was falling, in earnest, transforming Oak Hill into a winter scene from a storybook. The few remaining guests had checked out early, leaving Nya alone after sending her staff home. She built a fire in the main room's massive fireplace, then curled into one of the oversized chairs with a cup of tea and her tablet, a mistake, as it turned out. Unable to resist, she searched her own name. The results made her chest tighten. New articles, social media threads, a dedicated Reddit forum analyzing whether she was worthy of Nathaniel Gray. Strangers debated her appearance, her business acumen, reducing her to components for their entertainment. One particular comment thread caught her eye, users speculating on what tricks she must employ to keep a billionaire interested. The crude objectification struck like a physical blow. Is this what her life would be now, forever viewed through the distorting lens of Nathaniel's wealth and status? The thought drove her to the window, searching the snowy darkness for answers. The inn had been her anchor since childhood, the place she belonged completely, the legacy she had promised her parents to maintain. Now it had become a fishbowl, its privacy violated. When Nathaniel called that night, his deep voice usually brought immediate comfort. Now she hesitated before answering, unsure if she could maintain her careful facade. "You sound tired," he said immediately, his perception uncanny even across distance. "What's wrong, Nya?" The perceptiveness that normally warmed her suddenly felt invasive. How could she explain her feelings without sounding ungrateful or weak? How admit that the life he navigated with apparent ease was suffocating her? "Just tired," she repeated, hating the evasion but unable to voice the chaos in her mind. They spoke about mundane things, the beehives winterized for the season, plans for Thanksgiving. When they disconnected, Naya felt the weight of unspoken words between them, heavier than the snow blanketing the countryside. By dawn, after a night of restless tossing, she had reached a painful decision. After clearing snow from the driveway, the physical labor a welcome distraction, she confided in Mrs. Porter. "I need to go away for a while, Marge. I've contacted Lisa about taking over management temporarily." Concern creased the older woman's face. "Have you told him?" she asked gently. Not yet. Naya removed her snow-crusted boots by the door, avoiding Mrs. Porter's knowing gaze. I will. Fate intervened when Nathaniel's helicopter landed in Oak Hill's snow-covered field Thursday afternoon. Naya watched from the kitchen window as he emerged, his tall figure powerful even at a distance as he strode purposefully through the snow, leaving straight, determined tracks behind him. She met him at the door, his immediate embrace almost breaking her resolve. He smelled of expensive cologne and winter air, his body solid and warm against hers. Something's wrong, he said, drawing back to study her face, his hands warm on her shoulders. I could hear it in your voice yesterday. In her private sitting room, with gentle snow falling outside, Naya finally spoke the truth. Your world operates by different rules than mine, she explained, pulling away from his touch to stand by the window. It wasn't a problem when our worlds were separate. When you visited here, you lived by my rules. But now everything's exposed. My life isn't my own anymore. Understanding dawned in his eyes as she described the daily invasions, the crude speculations. I love you, she finished, her voice breaking slightly. Not your money or your corporate persona, just you. But loving you means my life isn't mine anymore. What are you saying, Nya? His voice was controlled, but she could see the fear in his eyes. I need space, she said finally. Time to figure out who I am in this new reality. I've booked a cottage on the Maine coast, not forever, just for a while. Pain crossed his face, quickly masked but not quickly enough. When do you leave? Sunday. He nodded once, decision made. Then we have until Sunday. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. I won't try to change your mind, but I won't waste our remaining time together. That night, their lovemaking carried a desperate edge, as if both sought to memorize each curve, each response, each sigh before separation. His hands were more urgent against her skin, his kisses deeper, more consuming. She matched his intensity, arching beneath him, pulling him closer, as if they might permanently fuse, if only they tried hard enough. I'm not running away from you, she whispered afterward, her cheek pressed to his thundering heart. I'm trying to find a way back to myself so I can be better for us. His fingers traced her spine with exquisite tenderness. I know, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And I'll be here, however long it takes. Chapter 8. Reflection. The Maine coastline in winter possessed a stark, elemental beauty that matched Nia's emotional landscape. Grey waves crashed against rocky shores, sending spray high into the biting air before freezing into delicate crystals. On barren branches, the small fishing village where she had rented a cottage maintained only minimal services during the off-season. A general store, a post office, a diner that closed by 7 each evening. Her cottage perched on a small bluff overlooking the harbour, its weathered shingles and blue-painted trim blending with dozens of similar structures dotting the coastline. Inside, simplicity reigned, wooden floors, basic furniture, a wood stove that required constant attention to ward off the persistent chill. The first week passed in a haze of sleep and silence. Exhaustion had followed Naya from Virginia, her body finally surrendering to the accumulated stress of recent months. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, waking only to eat simple meals, feed the wood stove, and wander briefly along the deserted beach before returning to hibernation. Her goodbye with Nathaniel had been heart-wrenching in its restraint. Neither had wept, though she had seen the sheen in his eyes as he helped load her car. Their final kiss carried both promise and permission to go, to seek, to find whatever answers she needed. His lips had lingered on hers, gentle yet possessive, a tactile pledge of patience. When they separated, he'd brushed his thumb across, her lower lip in a gesture so tender it had nearly broken her composure. I won't call unless you want me to, he had said, his voice husky with controlled emotion. But I'm always reachable, day or night, for anything. By the second week, physical rest had restored enough energy for mental clarity to return. Naya established simple routines. Morning walks along the shore regardless of weather. Afternoons, reading or writing in the small journal she'd brought. Evenings, cooking elementary meals from whatever the village store offered. On these solitary walks, wind whipping her hair and the crash of waves drowning all thought, Naya gradually untangled the knot of emotions that had driven her to this lonely shore. The easy explanation was media pressure, the sudden, unwelcome intrusion of public scrutiny into her private life. But as days of reflection accumulated, she recognized this as symptom rather than cause. The fundamental issue lay deeper, in questions of identity and autonomy. Who was she now? The innkeeper who had built Oak Hill into a sanctuary, or the billionaire's girlfriend whose every action generated speculation? Could those identities coexist without one consuming the other? More troubling was the question of belonging. Oak Hill had been her home, her purpose, her legacy, yet in fleeing she had surrendered it. Temporarily, yes, but the act itself revealed a fracture in her connection to the place that had defined her. Even her physical relationship with Nathaniel had become complicated by external perception. What had been natural and private, the way his hands moved over her body, the sounds she made when he touched her just right, the vulnerable moment of complete surrender, now felt observed, commented upon, imagined by strangers. Could she reclaim that intimacy, separate it from public consumption? On her third Sunday, Nya finally called Lisa for an update on the inn's operations. The conversation proved both reassuring and disorienting. Everything was running smoothly in her absence, yet hearing about familiar spaces managed by someone else produced a strange disconnection. "Mrs. Porter asks about you daily," Lisa reported, "and Nathaniel visited once just to drop off some insurance renewals." A pause, then. He looked tired, Naya, drawn. He didn't stay long. The information settled heavily. Was her absence causing him pain? Was that selfish of her, or necessary? The questions multiplied without resolution. December deepened, days growing shorter as the winter solstice approached. Snow fell frequently, transforming the coastal landscape into a monochromatic study punctuated only by the ever-changing sea. Nya's walks grew longer despite the cold, physical exertion providing temporary relief from circling thoughts. On one such walk, nearly 3 weeks into her self-imposed exile, clarity began to emerge, not as a sudden epiphany, but as a gradual recognition of truths that had been present all along. She had fled not from public scrutiny, but from the fear of losing herself within Nathaniel's world. His wealth, his power, his public persona, these created a gravitational pull that threatened to make her a mere satellite in his orbit rather than a celestial body with her own trajectory. Yet in running, she had committed the very error she feared, allowing external forces to define her choices rather than making them from a place of strength and self-knowledge. That evening, Nya built the fire higher than usual, wrapped herself in a blanket, and composed a letter to Nathaniel, not an email or text, but words written in her own hand on actual paper. "My dearest Nathaniel," she began, the salutation itself an acknowledgement of the place he held in her heart despite their separation. "The ocean here reminds me of you, powerful, constant, capable of both tremendous force and unexpected gentleness. I watch it daily and think about why I came here, what I've been seeking in this solitude. When I left, I told you I needed space to find myself. That wasn't entirely accurate. I needed space to confront my fears, specifically the fear of losing myself in the magnitude of your life. Your world moves mountains, Nathaniel. literally and figuratively. Mine tends gardens and fixes leaky faucets and bakes bread from scratch. When those worlds collided, I panicked, not because I don't love you, but because I began to doubt whether the person you love could survive in your orbit. These weeks alone have clarified things. I haven't been fighting external pressures as much as my own uncertainty about who I am and who I want to be. The question isn't whether I can be with you. It's whether I can be with you without becoming merely an extension of you. I believe, now that I can, but only if we both recognize that our relationship must create something new rather than requiring either of us to diminish ourselves to accommodate the other. I miss your touch. I miss your voice. I miss the way your eyes follow me across a room, but most of all, I miss the person I am when I'm with you. Stronger, braver, more fully myself than I ever knew I could be. I'm not ready to come back yet, but I wanted you to know that this retreat hasn't taken me further from you. It's bringing me closer to understanding how to be with you fully while remaining completely myself. With love and hope for our future, days passed with no response. Naya hadn't expected one immediately. Even express mail took time, and she had given Nathaniel no easy way to contact her. Still, each day's silence stretched her patience, questioning her certainty. Christmas approached, bringing a profound sense of displacement, her first holiday away from Oak Hill since childhood. The inn traditionally transformed during December. Garlands on every banister, a massive tree in the main room, mulled cider perpetually warming on the stove. Nia had always loved watching guests discover the Christmas cookies she tucked into unexpected places throughout the inn. Now those traditions would continue without her. 4 days before Christmas, a severe snowstorm descended upon the Maine coast. Nia returned from her daily walk to find drifts already forming against the cottage door, the wind driving flakes horizontally past windows, rapidly frosting over. Weather reports on the small radio warned of a significant nor'easter, recommending no travel for at least 24 hours. She built the fire higher than usual, grateful for the ample wood supply the cottage owner had provided. Outside, darkness fell early, the storm erasing boundaries between sea and shore, heaven and earth. Inside, Naya prepared a simple dinner, resigned to an evening of reading by firelight as wind howled around the cottage's sturdy frame. The knock, when it came, was so unexpected that at first she thought it merely the storm throwing debris against the door. When it repeated more insistently, Naya approached cautiously, wondering who would be out in such treacherous conditions. She opened the door to swirling snow and Nathaniel Gray, his tall figure barely recognizable beneath layers of winter gear. Crusted with ice and snow, his face red from cold, but his eyes blazing with determination. "I got your letter," he said simply, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face. "Some conversations need to happen in person." Nya stepped back automatically, allowing him entry. Snow followed him inside, melting instantly on the warm wooden floor. He unwound the scarf, revealing features reddened by cold but achingly familiar. The strong jaw, the expressive mouth, the intensity of his gaze as it met hers. "You could have called," Naya said, still processing his sudden appearance as she helped him remove his ice-encrusted coat. Her fingers brushed his, the familiar electric current still there, despite weeks apart. None of those seemed adequate. Nathaniel shivered slightly as warmth began to penetrate his cold, stiffened limbs. "Some conversations need to happen face to face." He reached for her then, one hand cupping her cheek with exquisite gentleness, as if she might disappear if he moved too quickly. "I've missed you," he said, the simple declaration containing volumes of unspoken emotion. The kiss began tenderly, A reacquaintance after absence, but quickly deepened as weeks of separation ignited the banked embers of their desire. His cold lips warmed against hers, his hands threading through her hair to cradle her head as she pressed against him, suddenly desperate to eliminate any space between them. "Wait!" she gasped, pulling back with reluctance. "We should talk first." Nathaniel nodded, his breathing uneven, eyes dark with desire but clear with understanding. "You're right, that's why I came." That night, as the storm raged outside, they sat before the fire and spoke with new honesty. Nathaniel admitted his own fears, that his wealth and position created barriers he couldn't dismantle, that he might lose her to the very success he'd spent his life building. "When we met, I was drawn to your self-sufficiency, your rootedness," he said, their fingers intertwined between them. "Yet somehow, I never fully considered what it would mean for you to be pulled into my world. I've spent my life accumulating power," he continued, firelight casting his features in gold and shadow, "building systems where I control variables, minimize uncertainties, optimize outcomes. It served me well in business, but relationships don't work that way, do they?" "No," she agreed softly, "they don't." His thumb traced circles on her palm, the simple touch sending ripples of awareness through her. "Your letter talked about creating something new," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate register that always made her stomach flutter. "Not your world or mine, but ours. I've been thinking about what that might look like." "I don't have answers yet," Naya admitted, lifting their joined hands to press a kiss to his knuckles. "I don't either," he said, surprising her. Nathaniel Gray always had answers, solutions, strategies. "But I have questions I didn't know to ask before, like what success actually means, like whether empire building has value if it compromises what matters most." Outside, the storm raged unabated, wind howling around the cottage's eaves. Inside, a different kind of tempest was being navigated with careful words and attentive, listening, and increasingly with touches that grew more deliberate as the night progressed. "I missed you," Naya said finally, the simple truth emerging without calculation as she moved into his arms, her head finding that perfect place against his shoulder. "I missed you every hour," Nathaniel replied, his voice low and intent as his lips found her temple, then traced a path to her mouth. "Every minute." What began as comfort evolved into passion, months of connection, providing the foundation for physical reunion that needed no words. Their bodies remembered each other, the places that brought pleasure, the rhythm that built toward ecstasy. Yet something had shifted, a new honesty infusing every caress, every sigh. In the soft aftermath, wrapped in blankets before the dying fire, snow still pelting the windows, Nia traced the contours of his face with wondering fingers. "I'm not ready to come back yet," she said gently. "There are still things I need to work through." "I know." He kissed her palm, then folded her fingers over it as if preserving the touch. "I didn't come to bring you back. I came because your letter offered hope, and I couldn't bear to experience that at a distance." The honesty between them felt both fragile and precious, a reconnection based not on easy reconciliation, but on mutual recognition of the work still to be done. Chapter 9. The stand morning light sparkled across unbroken snow, transforming the storm's aftermath into a glittering wonderland. Nia found Nathaniel in the small kitchen, his broad back to her, as he watched something cooking in the cottage's ancient cast-iron skillet. The domesticity of the scene, his sleeves rolled up, his movements confident in the unfamiliar space, tugged at something deep within her chest. "I found apples in the root cellar," he explained without turning, somehow sensing her presence. "And enough basic ingredients for breakfast. Power's still out, but the wood stove works surprisingly well." He turned then, spatula in hand, and the sight of him, Hair tousled from sleep and her fingers, stubble darkening his jaw, eyes warm with affection, sent a rush of desire through her despite their passionate night. He wore only jeans and a thermal shirt, and Nia found herself remembering the feel of his bare chest against hers just hours before. "You didn't have to do this," she said, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. Her fingers brushed his deliberately, savoring the small contact. "I wanted to." He flipped what appeared to be apple pancakes with unexpected skill. "Besides, I was awake early. Someone wore me out last night." His crooked smile sent heat blooming across her skin as memories of their lovemaking resurfaced. His weight above her, her name a prayer on his lips, the exquisite tension before release. They ate by the window, watching sunlight transform the snowscape into a glittering wonderland. Nathaniel's knee pressed against hers beneath the small table, the contact both casual and deliberately maintained. Their conversation remained thoughtful, neither rushing toward decisions or declarations, yet undercurrents of desire rippled beneath every exchange. "We should check the road," Nia suggested after breakfast, reluctantly breaking contact as she stood to clear their plates. "See if it's passable yet." Nathaniel caught her wrist as she reached for his empty mug, pulling her gently between his knees. "Not quite yet," he murmured, his hands settling on her hips as he looked up at her. "I'm not ready to think about leaving." Her body responded instantly to his touch, remembering the pleasure those hands had given her. "Nathaniel," she sighed as his fingers slipped beneath her sweater to find the warm skin of her waist. "We should talk more before." His smile was pure temptation as he pulled her closer, his breath warm through the thin fabric covering her abdomen. Nia laughed softly, running her fingers through his hair. "You know exactly what you're doing." "I do," he agreed, pressing a kiss just above her hip bone. "Is it working?" It was, dramatically so, but Nia summoned her willpower and stepped back. "The roads first, then we talk, then—" She let the promise hang between them, enjoying the heat that flared in his eyes. They bundled up and ventured outside, finding the cottage's driveway buried under 3 feet of pristine snow. Working together to clear a path became its own form of foreplay, the exertion bringing color to their cheeks, laughter bubbling between them, occasional snowballs leading to playful wrestling that left them breathless for reasons beyond physical exertion. By afternoon, the sky had darkened again, promising more snow by evening. They returned inside, cheeks flushed, clothes dampened, to rebuild the fire and warm themselves. "I've been thinking," Nathaniel said as they sat before the crackling flames, her back against his chest, his arms encircling her, "about what you said in your letter, creating something new rather than either of us trying to fit into the other's existing world." Nya tilted her head back against his shoulder to look up at him, encouraging him to continue. "What if we created a foundation?" The words came slowly, as if he were thinking aloud, his fingers absently tracing patterns on her arm. "Something focused on sustainable hospitality, rural economic development, the values Oak Hill embodies. It would provide a professional context for our relationship, a buffer against media intrusion, and a way to expand what you've built without compromising its integrity." The idea resonated with unexpected force. "A foundation," Naya repeated, turning in his arms to face him fully. "With what purpose exactly?" "Preserving places like Oak Hill," Nathaniel said, warming to the topic, his eyes brightening with enthusiasm. She typically saw when he spoke of business strategies. Supporting small inns and B&Bs committed to sustainable practices, creating apprenticeship programs for young people interested in hospitality outside corporate chains, whatever directions you wanted to explore. "You would hand me control of a grey foundation." Skepticism colored her tone, even as excitement kindled. "Not a grey foundation." he corrected gently, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. A Bennett foundation, with my support. Your vision, your values, my resources, a genuine partnership. The proposal hung between them, not a solution to every challenge they faced, but a framework that acknowledged both their separate strengths and their shared values. Nathaniel watched her face intently, allowing her time to process without pressure. It wouldn't solve everything, Naya said carefully, her fingers playing with the collar of his shirt. The media would still intrude. Your corporate world would still make demands. True, Nathaniel acknowledged, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. But it would give you purpose and protection, beyond just being Nathaniel Gray's girlfriend. It would create the third space we've been talking about, neither Oak Hill nor Gray Industries, but something new that belongs to both of us. Snow began falling again outside, soft flakes drifting past the window in lazy spirals. Inside, the potential of their future together expanded in new directions neither had imagined before. I can't answer now, Naya said finally, though her heart was already responding with enthusiastic affirmation. It's a beautiful vision, but I need to be sure it's right for me, not just a reaction to our current challenges. Of course, Nathaniel agreed, pulling her closer until she straddled his lap, their faces inches apart. Take whatever time you need. I just wanted you to know I've been thinking about concrete ways to build that third space, not just wishing for it. The position was intimate, without being overtly sexual, allowing them to maintain their serious conversation despite the growing awareness between them. Naya rested her forearms on his shoulders, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. I've missed you, she said, the words emerging without calculation. Not just physically. I've missed talking to you like this. I've missed the way you challenge me to think bigger. I've missed you every hour, he replied, his hands settling at her waist with familiar possessiveness. The physical distance was difficult, but the emotional distance was unbearable. The honest vulnerability in his voice, this powerful man, admitting his struggle, melted the last of Naya's hesitation. She leaned forward, closing the small distance between them to press her lips to his. The kiss began gently but quickly deepened as weeks of separation and a day of building tension culminated in mutual hunger. Nathaniel's hands moved beneath her sweater with practiced skill, rediscovering the contours of her body as she unbuttoned his shirt with eager fingers. Here? He asked against her mouth as she rocked against him deliberately. Here, she confirmed, already working at his belt. Now, their lovemaking carried a new quality, not the desperate edge of their goodbye, nor the careful reacquaintance of last night, but something deeper, more intentional. Each touch, each kiss, each movement of their bodies coming together reaffirmed their commitment to finding a path forward together. When release finally claimed them both, Nia collapsed against his chest, their hearts racing in synchronicity. I need to go home, she said suddenly, the decision forming even as she spoke it. Not tomorrow necessarily, but soon. This retreat was necessary, but I can't hide forever. Oak Hill is mine, and I won't let the world take it from me. A smile spread across Nathaniel's face, not triumphant, but deeply approving. That sounds like the Nia Bennett I know. His fingers traced the curve of her spine with tender appreciation. The woman I love. I'm still scared, she admitted, pressing a kiss to his collarbone. The foundation idea is beautiful, but we'd still be swimming against a powerful current. True, he agreed, rolling them gently until she lay beneath him on the cushions they'd pulled to the floor. But I think we've proven we're both strong swimmers. His lips found the sensitive spot below her ear that always made her shiver, and we're particularly good together. The metaphor pulled a laugh from her, the first genuine one in weeks. We have at that. That night, as snow continued to fall, and wind rattled the cottage windows. They made love again, with slow deliberation, learning each other anew after separation. In the quiet aftermath, as moonlight found momentary passage through breaking clouds to illuminate the room in silver light, Naya rested her head on Nathaniel's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I don't have all the answers yet," she whispered, tracing patterns on his skin. "But I know running away isn't the right response. Whatever we face it on our feet, looking forward." Nathaniel's arms tightened around her, his lips pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Together," he said, echoing their promise from months before. "Together," she agreed, the word no longer frightening, but fortifying. Chapter 10. Homecoming. Christmas. Eve morning dawned clear and brutally cold over the Maine coast. 3 days had passed since the storm, days spent in peaceful coexistence as Naya and Nathaniel negotiated the boundaries of their renewed relationship. The cottage had become a cocoon of intimacy, cooking simple meals together, reading by the fire, making love with increasing inventive enthusiasm on every available surface. "I never knew kitchen counters could be so versatile," Nia had teased after one particularly spontaneous encounter, her body still humming with satisfaction as Nathaniel kissed his way up her inner thigh. "I'm developing a whole new appreciation for cottage furniture," he'd responded, his usual corporate polish delightfully abandoned as he pulled her to the floor for a second round. The isolation had been healing, allowing them to reconnect physically and emotionally without external pressures or judgments. But reality beckoned. Roads had been cleared, power restored, cell service re-established. Nothing stood in the way of departure except the decision itself. They had discussed various options: staying through Christmas, returning to Oak Hill together, or Nathaniel returning to the city while Naya continued her retreat. Their conversations had been honest but inconclusive, neither wanting to pressure the other toward a premature decision. The choice became clear when Lisa called with news that the ancient boiler at Oak Hill had finally surrendered, leaving the inn without heat just as holiday guests were due to arrive. "Mrs. Porter has space heaters in every room," Lisa reported, her voice tight with stress. "But it's a stopgap at best. The HVAC company can't get a replacement installed until after New Year's, which means we'll have to cancel all Christmas reservations." Nathaniel, overhearing the conversation, was already on his phone before Naya ended the call. 10 minutes later, he appeared in the doorway of the bedroom where she was folding laundry, his expression both determined and cautiously triumphant. "A new commercial-grade boiler system will be delivered to Oak Hill by helicopter this afternoon," he announced without preamble. "Installation crew arrives an hour later. They'll work through the night if necessary to have it operational by morning." Nya paused, a sweater half-folded in her hands. 6 weeks ago, such high-handed problem-solving would have triggered her independence reflexes, the need to handle her own problems, the resistance to solutions money alone could provide. Now she saw the action differently, not as Nathaniel imposing his methods on her world, but as him using his unique resources to protect something she valued. "Thank you," she said simply, crossing the room to embrace him. His arms came around her automatically, his body warm and solid against hers. "You just saved Christmas for a lot of families." He kissed the top of her head, his chin resting there perfectly. "The helicopter can take us directly to Oak Hill when we're ready. Skip the 8-hour drive." "I'd rather drive," Nya replied, leaning back to look up at him. "I need the transition time to prepare." Again, Nathaniel nodded without argument. "I'll arrange for a car." His hands slid down her back to cup her bottom appreciatively. "Though I was hoping for one more night here alone with you." Nya rose on tiptoe to kiss him, her body responding instantly to his touch. "We'll have plenty of nights together," she promised against his mouth. And I can think of a few places at Oak Hill we haven't christened yet. His growl of approval vibrated through her, sending shivers of anticipation down her spine. Now that sounds like a homecoming. 3 hours later, they were southbound on the interstate, Maine's rocky coastline, giving way to New Hampshire's rolling hills, then Massachusetts' more densely populated landscapes. Nina drove the first stretch, finding comfort in the physical act of navigation, while Nathaniel handled a series of calls, ensuring the boiler installation would proceed smoothly. "I've been thinking about your foundation idea," she said as they crossed into Connecticut, the winter landscape rushing past their windows. "I like the concept, but I want to start small. Maybe focus first on creating an apprenticeship program based at Oak Hill, young people learning sustainable hospitality practices firsthand." Nathaniel, who had been reading emails on his tablet, set it aside to give her his full attention. "That sounds perfect. Start with what you know best, then expand as you're ready." "It would mean changes to Oak Hill," she continued, glancing at him briefly before returning her eyes to the road. "Converting some guest rooms to student housing, redesigning spaces for teaching." "Changes you're comfortable with?" The question, focused on her comfort rather than efficiency or profit, reinforced her growing confidence in their path forward. "Yes, changes that honor the inn's purpose while expanding its impact." They stopped for dinner at a small roadside restaurant in Northern Virginia, just 2 hours from Oak Hill. The normalcy of the experience. Plastic menus, vinyl booths, waitresses who didn't recognize Nathaniel provided a final pause before re-entering their complicated reality. "Are you ready for this?" Nathaniel asked as they returned to the car, snow beginning to fall in gentle flurries that glittered in the parking lot lights. "No," Naya answered honestly, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. "But I'm ready to be not ready, if that makes sense. I don't expect perfection anymore, from the situation or from myself." He caught her hand, turning it to press a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her despite the cold. "That might be the wisest thing either of us has said yet." His eyes darkened with familiar heat, "though I might need one more moment alone with you before we arrive." He backed her gently against the car door, sheltered from view by their vehicle, and the falling snow. His kiss was thorough, possessive, a reminder of the passion that had sustained them through these difficult days. Naya responded eagerly, her body arching into his despite the layers of winter clothing between them. "A preview," he murmured against her throat, "of later." Night had fully fallen by the time they turned onto Oak Hill's long driveway. Snow crunched beneath their tires, trees formed a tunnel of welcoming branches overhead, and then the inn appeared around the final curve, windows blazing with warm light, wreaths on every door, a towering Christmas tree visible through the main room's picture window. Mrs. Porter must have been watching for their headlights. The front door opened as they parked, spilling golden light across the snow. She stood framed in the doorway, hands clasped at her chest, her face a study in relieved joy. "Welcome home," she called, the words carrying across the crisp night air. Home. The word resonated through Naya with physical force. This place was home, not because it was perfect or protected from the world's complications, but because it was where she belonged, where her purpose took physical form, where she could build something meaningful with the man beside her. Nathaniel came around the car to stand beside her, offering his hand, but not rushing her moment of reconnection. She took it, their fingers intertwining naturally, and together they walked the path to Oak Hill's welcoming door. Inside, the scent of pine boughs and cinnamon greeted them, along with the distinctive mechanical hum of a brand-new heating system. Working efficiently, Lisa emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron, followed by several staff members who had clearly been waiting for this moment. "The boiler works beautifully," Lisa reported, smiling at Nathaniel. "And the company sent their best installers." "Of course they did," Nia murmured, squeezing his hand in silent acknowledgement of his behind-the-scenes efforts. They moved through the inn's main room, where the massive Christmas tree that had been Nia's father's tradition stood decorated, with ornaments collected over decades, each with a story, a memory, a connection to Oak Hill's history. Guests sat in the oversized chairs by the fireplace, nodding politely as they passed. "We've kept your quarters exactly as you left them," Mrs. Porter said, leading the way toward the private wing. "Though we did put up a small tree, it didn't seem right not to have one." At the threshold to her private living room, Nia paused, overwhelmed by the simple rightness of returning to this space that was so completely hers. The small tree Mrs. Porter mentioned glowed in one corner, decorated with the personal ornaments Nia had collected since childhood, separate from the inn's public display, but no less meaningful. "I'll let you get settled," Nathaniel said, sensing her need for a moment alone in her space. "I can take room 4 or—" The unfinished question hung between them, a choice offered without pressure, another example of how far they had come in understanding each other's needs. "Stay with me," Nia said, taking both his hands in hers. "This is where we begin building that third space, right here, where both our worlds can exist side by side." Later, after midnight had passed and Christmas Day had officially begun, Nia stood at her bedroom window, watching snow continue to fall, transforming Oak Hill's grounds into a perfect winter tableau. Behind her, Nathaniel slept peacefully, his breathing deep and even in the quiet room. They had christened her bed thoroughly, their passion both celebration and homecoming. Nathaniel had worshipped her body with practiced skill and genuine reverence, his touch both familiar and thrillingly new after their time apart. Nia had matched his intensity, boldly guiding him where she wanted him, finding profound freedom in their mutual pleasure. The journey wasn't over. Challenges remained. Media attention would continue, the balance between their worlds would require constant adjustment, and both would need to grow in ways neither had anticipated when they first met on that stormy night. But standing there, watching snow blanket the home she had nearly surrendered, Nia felt something settle within her, a certainty that transcended the questions still unanswered. Whatever came next, they would face it with clear eyes and mutual respect, building something neither could have created alone. Outside, the ancient oak that gave Oak Hill its name stood sentinel against the night sky, its branches collecting snow in silent benediction over the inn and its occupants. Inside, two people who had found each other against improbable odds slept peacefully, finally home in every sense of the word. As Nia returned to bed, sliding beneath the covers to curl against Nathaniel's warmth, his arms instinctively gathered, her close, even in sleep. She pressed a kiss to his chest, directly over his heart, and closed her eyes. "Merry Christmas," she whispered, surrendering to dreams of the future they would build together. One day, one choice, one passionate night at a time.